Without further ado, I'd like to bring up our guest speakers, Commissioner Sid Miller and Attorney Lisa Pittman. Got you guys some EarthX water too for the branding. Thank you, EarthX. We love saving the environment with hemp. I've got some water. So welcome to EarthX Hemp. How are you guys enjoying your time on the expo floor inside the Centennial Building at Fair Park?
Great. This is an amazing event, and it's really wonderful to educate and spread awareness about how the hemp plant is part of the sustainability of our entire environment.
You know, I'm impressed. Y'all have a whole wing now for hemp in Texas. I'm kind of like you. Who would have thunk that?
It's fun times. We're definitely happy to have you here, Commissioner Miller. After your support of hemp, there's a lot of people that have made hemp possible in Texas, and we're not there yet, but your support has done a lot for the plant.
Sure, and let me just give everybody kind of the background on where we are, kind of how we got here. First of all, let me say there's a lot of hills left to climb before we get to the finish line, okay? We're just starting. So basically, other states have been growing hemp under the 2014 Farm Bill. Texas has not done that. We chose not to do that. And they do that under an experimental permit from a land-grant university under research. So there's some states that are actually ahead of us. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, the federal restriction on growing hemp was lifted, and it said we'll leave it up to the states to regulate that. Okay? In the past, people have asked me, said, are you ready to grow hemp in Texas? I said, no, I'm not. It's against federal law. I'm not spending any department time or energy on that, on something that's illegal. We can't do it. So I guess I'm kind of blunt and to the point. So I guess people were kind of surprised when the federal restriction was lifted that I was all over it. But again, I say I wasn't ready to spend any of our resources on something that was illegal and couldn't possibly happen. But that's gone, so it's a different day now. So we want hemp here. We want our farmers to have it. We want the producers here. We want the manufacturers. We want the oil products come from Texas. We want it all here. We're like that. So come to the 2018 Farm Bill, they're going to leave the regulation up to the states. Well, there's 7 states where hemp is still illegal. It's a controlled substance, and you can't grow it because of state law. That's the case here in Texas. So the legislature's in session. So we've asked the legislature, and we're working with them to remove the restriction and get it off the forbidden substance list. So that's working its way through. It's gone through the House at the speed of light, out of committee, no opposition. 25 people testified for it, no opposition. Passed off the House floor 144-0, and it's sitting in the Senate doing nothing. So we think the problem's in the Senate. If you can reach out to the Lieutenant Governor, he could make the thing happen. But without that, we may not be able to grow hemp in Texas.
If you're out there and you're looking alive, listen to Commissioner Miller. We need all hands on deck. Please email Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick that Texas has the right to grow hemp, and that it's going to be really good for the farmers, the processors. There's a lot of industry in other states right now that we can't afford 2 more years, Commissioner Miller. We're losing business here in the great state of Texas.
Well, like I said, we want to be on the cusp of it, because not only do I want the farmers to have another tool in their toolbox, because it's a great crop, great rotational crop, great monetary crop for them, but we want all the ancillary businesses that come with it. We want to put those jobs in rural Texas. We want the processors. We want the manufacturers. Texas needs to be hub for this crop. So, from that point, we have to have legislation to get passed. If it gets passed, we're still not there. We will have to follow federal guidelines, and there are no federal guidelines. So talking to my good friend Sonny Perdue, who heads up the USDA, Secretary Perdue, he promised me that the federal guidelines will be out in October or November. At that point, providing all the legislation we need passes, we get the guidelines. My department, the Department of Agriculture, can write rules that will coincide and meet the guidelines of the federal government. I have to do that. I have to publish them for 90 days of public comment where you get to weigh in. We let the public have their say. And once all that's done, we can adopt them, and then we're possibly ready to plant hemp. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. If the legislation they pass has restrictions and says Miller can do this but not this, and that doesn't coincide with the federal guidelines, we're stuck for 2 years till the legislature can come back and undo what they did. So I'm going to let that's kind of the 40,000 foot view of what needs to happen. And by the way, a lot of you here I've talked to are ready to plant. We have to get certified seed. We'll be the ones to make sure that the seed is pure and clean. But a lot of people hadn't thought about this. Since hemp isn't illegal to grow in Texas, there's no pesticides, no herbicides, no insecticides, no fungicides labeled for hemp. There's nothing. So you're going to have to grow it basically organically or with off-the-shelf chemicals, which is going to be tough, especially in East Texas because fungus can affect it, have a big effect on it. So we would come out, test your field, see what the amount of THC is, if it meets the federal guidelines, which we don't know for sure what even the guidelines are going to be. If it has too much THC in it, we'll have to destroy your crop. I don't want to destroy any farmer's crop. But also, we'll have to test for chemicals, pesticides. And if we find that you've used Roundup on it or Treflan or some fungicide, and we have traces of that, we have to destroy your crop. So I want everybody to be real clear on that. And I've got one more pointer for all the farmers out here. I'm an 8th generation farmer and rancher. We've been doing this since 1700, okay? If there's one thing I know, if you tell a farmer that there's a profit in this crop, he'll plant it to the world's level with it. And the price will go to nothing. So if you're planning on planting it, make sure you have a contract. Not all contracts are good, but at least you got something, okay? Get you a contract. Don't plant it on speculation because we could have more hemp than we can. There's no processors, really. There's a lot of boutique processors and small processors, but there's not anybody that can handle 10,000 acres of hemp coming out of Nolan County, okay? All right, here's the legal expert. She can tell you what all I said wrong.
No, you were right on, Commissioner Miller.
With that being said, it sounds like in an indirect way you're telling Texas farmers to be ready to plant by spring 2020.
The earliest we'll be able to plant is next spring. Now, the wheels could come off. If the U.S. government says they'll have the guidelines ready by October, November, that's probably December or January. Then I have to have 45 days to write the rules. Then I have to give you 90 days to comment on them. That's cutting it pretty tight to be able to put a crop in. So just be aware of that, okay?
Lisa, are there any things you'd say? Are there any things you'd say to farmers that are looking in? There's not a lot of infrastructure in the space. Commissioner Miller just mentioned about the lack of legitimate full service processing and manufacturing. What should farmers or people entering in the hemp space, what's the first thing they should do as an entrepreneur or potential business owner?
Well, the first thing is to call your senator and let them know that you're supportive of the current hemp bill that's the leading front runner, sponsored by Representative Tracy King in the House. It's 1325. As he said, it sailed through to cheers and applause. It needs to be known that that's supported. We got to get that passed. Then the Texas Department of Agriculture will get to work on the rules. Mr. King's bill provides for the Department of Agriculture to come up with rules by January 1st, 2020. So I would expect that while the USDA is promulgating its rules, the Department of Agriculture is also going to be looking at what's going on there, what's going on in other states, track that, be involved in this rulemaking process that Commissioner Miller announced. The proposed rules will be published in the Texas Register. You'll have an opportunity to comment on those and be involved in the shaping of the program. And then, as he said, toward the end of the year, we'll get alignment with what the USDA is doing so that the Texas program will be in line with that. And then be ready to go. Part of the rulemaking process will include the licensure process, what you need to do to qualify for a license to grow hemp in Texas. And so be paying close attention and be involved so that you're ready to go for the earliest possible time to plant in 2020. But pay attention because, as he said, there could be some hiccups there at the end. It's not a guaranteed thing that this will pass all the way through, so track the legislation and watch the Texas Register.
Commissioner Miller made a really good point too, that all contracts aren't good. When you're talking about fiber, different CBD, there's different variants of this hemp crop that aren't all valued the same way. So, the Texas farmer suicide rate is something that we learned about a few months ago, actually, and that's not a joke. It's something that folks really don't like to talk about, but I was doing some research in the hemp industry, and it's not a joke that our Texas farmers that have owned these lands for generations are losing their land. So it's really, it's high time that Texas farmers are able to grow hemp, and we're really happy that we have professionals like you guys leading the way for us.
Our country has a long history of growing hemp. Our founding fathers grew hemp. George Washington had hemp on his farm. So it's, we've banned it a couple of times and brought it back and banned it again and brought it back. But hopefully we have much more knowledge about the plant, the THC in it. We have a lot better grasp on crossbreeding and genetic engineering. So we'll get there eventually, and we'll have some products labeled for it, but we're not going to have them labeled for this very first crop, okay? And a lot of people in here want to grow it organically anyway. Well, that's great, because basically that's how you're going to have to do it, at least your first crop.
Well, it sounds like we've got some great answers. Is there anything else you guys like to say before we did a pretty short Q&A?
No, I was just going to say that Tracy King's bill, which I have printed out on my desk over there, it sets out a seed certification program, a manifest program to facilitate transportation. It requires the Department of Health Services to cooperate with the Department of Agriculture as to consumable products, such as these hemp-derived topicals and oils that you see. And so come take a look. And it also is, strives to promote business in Texas for the hemp trade and protect it and have people be able to travel and sell in the state without law enforcement repercussions.
Let me just make one statement, and I know there's some questions in the crowd. Make no mistake about it. This crop will be the highest regulated crop that you can grow. It'll be highly, highly, highly regulated. Now, from my standpoint as the Commissioner of Agriculture in writing the rules, we will do the bare minimum. We're going to do just barely enough to satisfy the federal government. I'm not going to put anything on top of that. I'm a small government guy, and we want to...
Texas, baby!
I'm a farmer, and, just stay out of my life, leave me alone, let me farm. So we'll do the bare minimum, but keep in mind, the bare minimum is going to be a lot, highly regulated, okay? We're going to have to come out to your farm more than once, twice, 3 times. We're going to have to inspect your seed, certify your seed source, transportation, take leaf samples, test for THC, test for chemical residue. If you've got anything to hide, you may want to grow a different crop. Let me just tell you, okay? Just kidding. So anyway, just want everybody to know what you're getting into. No surprises. Okay. Let's take a few questions if you like.
Yeah, if anybody's looking for any questions right here.
Okay. Thank you for being here, Commissioner Miller and Lisa Pittman, attorney. I just wondered, there seems to be, I don't know if you can answer this question, but there seems to be layers of laws regarding cultivation, CBD, cannabis cultivated as marijuana, all these different applications. How do you see the Texas government streamlining cannabis as a single product?
Well, the way that will be done, under the federal guidelines, we'll lay all that out. It'll have the maximum amount of THC it can have. It'll say it'll have to be tested prior to harvest, possibly tested after harvest. Transportation will have to be monitored some way. I don't know how. Seed can only come from these certain sources. I don't know what those are. Maybe you can get it from Europe. Maybe you can't. Maybe it can only come from Canada. Maybe it can't. We don't know, okay? So all of that will be spelled out. I'll write rules to satisfy those federal guidelines. We'll put it out for public comment. Everybody can comment on it, and I'll go, whoops, didn't think of that. Let's fix that, and then we'll publish them. Now we're going to have to do this. We can't be dilly-dallying. We got to get this done. so y'all guys can get in the field and get it planted. So
I have a question. So you talked about the federal regulations that are coming out, right? So you want to write those. So what about the states that are already growing hemp today? They haven't been under federal restrictions, it's only been state level at this point. So if there's no regulations for federal, then are you going to work with other states that are already growing today to write with those?
that is confusing. I get this question a lot, and jump in here. I don't want to hog the mic, but basically it says, so if there's no federal regulations, how are people already growing hemp? They're doing it on the 2014 Farm Bill under an experimental permit in conjunction with some university for research, okay? And they're using the university's guidelines to test the research. And it's on a very, very limited basis. You know, the permits are small,
Right.
5 acres, 6 acres in most cases, something like that. Now, 2018 Farm Bill is in effect this growing season. So this next growing season. So this is the last season that they can grow under those experimental permits, under the old Farm Bill.
Okay.
Next planting season will be on the 2018 Farm Bill, and there'll be federal, like I said, the federal guidelines are coming, and every state will have to comply. I hope that clears that up.
It does. I
people
appreciate
say,
it.
well, if there's no guidelines, how do you grow it? Well, that's the old Farm Bill, experimental permit, new Farm Bill, guidelines.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I was going to jump into that. What's going on right now is under the 2014 Farm Bill until the 2018 Farm Bill's complete with regulations. And some states could, under the 2000 Farm Bill, also put together an industrial hemp program. So that's what we see in Colorado, Kentucky, Montana, and
Right.
Oregon. However, under the 2014 Farm Bill, those products were not supposed to leave state lines.
Right.
As we know, it is blowing up. People are becoming aware, and it's not supposed to. And that's a major change with the 2018 Farm Bill, is the removal of the definition of hemp from the definition of marijuana, Schedule I substance, and allowing for interstate commerce, allowing for it to cross state lines
Right.
and fall under a federal regime, as Commissioner Miller described.
Okay. So I guess everybody on the federal level of all the states that are growing today will have to change and get a new license coming up for the 2018 Farm Bill. Is that correct?
Yeah, so even Colorado is going to have to tweak its program and probably submit it to the USDA for approval.
Okay.
The USDA regulations say may approve or reject state plans, and that's legally significant because it doesn't say shall. So shall means must. So
Right.
since it says may, and they're still writing the regulations, who knows what's going to ultimately come out in the pudding after they're finished promulgating the regulations.
Gotcha. So one question for Sid. So are you going to put a limitation on the small farmer out there, like a land limitation when you're looking for the guidelines for licensing here in Texas? Or are you going to cap the licenses also that you're going to give?
I'm going to follow the federal guidelines, the bare minimum.
Okay. Thank you.
No, I don't do. We're not going to do that.
Okay.
So, unless the federal guidelines say you can only issue so many acres, whatever. I don't anticipate they'll do that.
Right.
So,
I don't think
we're
so
not
either.
going to try to restrict the growing of it. I'm a free market guy too, so we'll just let the market level all that out.
Okay.
We've got time
Thank
for a
you.
few more.
All right, this might be missing the mark a little bit, but I was just wanting some clarity on this bill that's made it to the next level as a few days ago. Is that just allowing for the agricultural use and growing of industrial hemp? That does not necessarily clarify what it can be used for, or am I reading that incorrectly? Like, is it allowed, if that gets passed in Texas, then it's fully legal to create CBD and sell CBD and hemp products, or is it just talking about the industrial use for fiber and car bodies and clothing?
That's a good question for the lawyer.
Yes, no, it does address that, and it does contemplate you, and I invite you to come over and look at the statute, and I'll show you. It requires the Department of Health Services to cooperate with the Texas Department of Agriculture in creating regulations to govern those products. It creates some standards for retailers to have a time to cure a negligent violation, and it does envision these types of products and processing and then the end product and how those will be handled and regulated.
Two more.
Can I? Okay. So obviously in the lawmaking process, education has a huge role to play. And as a lawyer and a politician, how do you see education tying into your role in moving this along in a positive way that, of course, you spoke to profits, but the other side with sustainable development, specifically protecting like both ends, and where do you see education going in Texas, and how do you plan to play a role in that?
Well, we're both doing all we can to educate and create awareness. Over there, I've got a bunch of books about hemp and all the industrial uses of hemp, and I mean, that's one of my causes and motivations, is creating an understanding of how hemp is different from marijuana or cannabis, and how this plant can be used for the body, for the soil, for the environment, and so forth. And eventually, we'll come back around, and our students are going to be taught about it once again.
Here we go.
Sid, do you think you'll have a restrictions for cross-pollination? I hear if you have CBD growing in a 5-mile radius and they're growing fiber nearby that could cross-pollinate and mess up the CBD crop, are you going to have any kind of regulation for that?
Exactly understand what he said, but
A prescription for cross-pollination of what?
A restriction to make sure with the cross-pollination doesn't happen for people's crops.
well, that is going to be one of the largest problems we have to deal with. You know, if you put in 50 acres of hemp and your neighbor over in the creek and the brush has got a little weed growing and it pollinates, when I come out there, if it's over the whatever the limit is set, I have to destroy your crop. I don't want to do that. So you're going to have to take some personal responsibility, visit with your neighbors, walk the creeks, make sure that there's nothing that will contaminate your crop. Because if it does, I don't even know what it's going to cost to put in an acre of hemp, but it's not going to be cheap because the seed's going to be extremely high. That'd be probably your largest cost. You don't want to lose that. So, you know, I would advise all the farmers that plant this, be absolutely sure that there's nothing else in the area that can, you know, make your crop go over the THC limit. So it's going to be very imperative that you stay under that limit. We may be able to, I don't know what the guidelines are going to be, but we may be able to do a second test on it later after it's dried or something and get you in. But at some point, if it's not under the limit, plowed under.
I'd really like to appreciate everybody for coming out to EarthX Hemp. There's a few special people we need to thank. Thank you, EarthX. Thank you, Tremorel S. Crow, for making this entire conference a possibility. Thank you, Commissioner Miller and Lisa. Can we take a picture with these EarthX water bottles? We appreciate you guys for coming out. You gotta get this right here. Let's do it for EarthX right here.